welcome to Economics Anonymous. I'm Kiana, your host, and today we're going to be talking about education administration. We have a few questions that our audience members have sent in and would like to ask some of our professionals flown in all the way from California today to talk to us. First, we have Maddie here to talk to us a little bit about superintendents and what it's like in the field. The first question we have from an audience member is, what are the duties of a superintendent?
Well, the duties of a superintendent are they're the chief executive officer of a school district. The general management responsibilities are hiring of the staff, and with that, they have to evaluate all the school staff. Oversee education standards and student success in the district, plan the budgets, oversee and receive resources for the schools from the government, and they're the person who interacts with the government agencies to get the money they need.
Cool, okay. So second, we have, what are some of the personality traits that you would look for in a superintendent?
I would look for that they must work well in group settings, they must have good leadership skills, they must work well with children, and they have to be able to work well in a busy, active position.
Nice, okay. So who do they typically interact with?
They typically interact with government agencies, principals, school staff, teachers in the district, and the school board of the district.
Nice. And then, who do they report to?
The school board of the district.
Nice.
They're like the main people.
All right. Cool. Okay, so next, could you tell us a little about what the supply for a superintendent would look like?
Well, the requirements to be a superintendent in the district is the minimum requirement is a master's degree in education. Many superintendents have a doctoral degree in education, which is above the minimum requirement. All states require superintendents to be certified or licensed.
Okay. All right. Could you tell us what the requirements would be to become a superintendent? Is that along the same lines as having a certification? Okay. And the last question for you from one of our audience members is, what are the requirements to obtaining one of those certifications or licenses you were telling us about?
There are different requirements for different states depending on where you want to be a superintendent at. It's typically a 2-year program with a master's degree prerequisite, also including some field work with shadowing or interning with a few superintendents for a couple of months. And students working on their doctoral degree can get the requirements they need while they're getting their degree.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Maddie.
Thank you for having me.
Next, we're going to bring in Heidi to talk to us a little bit more about the demand of superintendents. Thank you. Woo! Economics Anonymous, and we are here now with Heidi, who's one of our more local guest speakers today, and she's going to talk to us a little bit more about the demand of superintendents. First question for you today, Heidi, is what firms create the demand for a superintendent?
Well, the school board is considered the firm when we're thinking about the demand for a superintendent, and the school board makes the decision of hiring a superintendent. The board must consider the skills of the administrator and how they affect the overall efficiency of the district, and it's up to the board to determine the superintendent's salary, their general job responsibilities, and ongoing professional requirements.
Cool. Okay. Another question from an audience member is, what is the school board's job? And how are they elected?
The school board members make up the largest body of elected officials in the United States, so it's a really big group. In most districts serve 4-year terms and are elected within the district during the general election, so they're voted on by the public in that district. School districts are pretty complex corporations. They're oftentimes the largest employers in a community, so they play a very important role in affecting jobs, resources, and of course most importantly the education in the children. School boards establish a vision for the community's schools. They have to set up and maintain an effective and efficient organizational structure for the district and set the tune for administrators, how they manage schools, and teachers, what their foundation is. They are responsible for hiring and evaluating the superintendent and evaluating and adopting policies that affect all schools within the district. They serve as conflicts go unresolved within the school. So they play a very important role, and they are the firm that the superintendent would answer to and be hired by.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you. Our next question is, why does the school board need to hire a superintendent?
The school board primarily hires the superintendent to act as the CEO of the district. So again, a very important job. The candidate must possess strong managerial skills and must be qualified to oversee the district's educational standards. The job requires an instructional leader who has a vision for promoting education and an aptitude for handling the digit's budgetary concerns. Must be able to oversee students and staff and also be responsible for understanding and working with federal and
Nice. Sort of the head honcho of things.
Yes, yes.
All right. Okay, so how is a superintendent secured?
The employment of most superintendents is secured by way of contract. Generally, that contract is set for a specified time that's agreed upon by the superintendent and the school board. Locally, for instance, here locally in Kansas City, we have Blue Valley School District in the Overland Park area where Dr. Trigg is the current superintendent, and he's served since 2004, so he's got a tenure, been here for a while. Whereas the Kansas City, Missouri School District, which has had a lot of challenges, of course, has hired Stephen Green for a second term. He just signed a 5-year contract. So.
All right. So then, what are the determinants of a superintendent's salary?
The biggest determinant in the salary really is the enrollment or the district. He just signed a 5-year contract. So.
All right. So then, what are the determinants of a superintendent's salary?
The biggest determinant in the salary really is the enrollment or the district population. So, how many students they're overseeing. And in that, really, the bigger part of that is not just how many students are in the district, but how much staff is related to the student base. So, for more students, you have more teachers, and you also have more managerial skills in the way of budget and, being concerned with those state and federal laws. So, the whole job responsibility is much bigger. Along with managing people, like I said, the accounting and the money management tasks are pretty big. And also the board's concerned with the experience and the education of the candidate. So how much job experience do they come with? Does the candidate come with? And specifically, in the administration field, it is important that they've had a lot of experience in education. So.
All right. Okay, our next question is, does geographic location play a role in determining the demand for a superintendent?
Geography can have an impact on the income. So you'll see in some of the larger cities where there's a high-risk school or a school that's really needing some extra help, they've been unaccredited or has bigger issues that need to be tackled. Sometimes you'll see the pay is way out of scale with the job because they're trying to remedy a situation. But for the most part, the geography doesn't really impact the demand. I mean, the demand for a superintendent is there regardless of where you're at geographically. Every school, private or public, has a need for a superintendent.
Okay, cool. And our very last question from our audience members today is, from an economic standpoint, is demand for a superintendent elastic or inelastic?
Because of the need for the superintendent, because the need is so constant, a flex in pay might lure highly qualified candidates to some of those harder to place positions that I talked about earlier, but all in all, the demand is pretty inelastic. There is not a lot of correspondence between the pay and the need for the job. So as I said before, the job need is kind of always there, regardless of the pay. So.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for being here today with us, Heidi, and answering all of our questions. We'll be back in just a few seconds. Our final segment on Economics Anonymous today. We have with us today Rashinda, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about superintendents and closing out some of the market demands and things like that. Our first question today for Rashinda from our audience member is, what is the pay like for a superintendent?
Well, within the job of an education administration superintendent, the pay can vary. There is usually anywhere between $66,000 to $175,000 for pay, and that's with the inclusion of bonuses and overtime and things like that. It just kind of depends on where you're at locally and what district you're in.
Okay.
And unlike teaching as a superintendent, wages usually do not dramatically increase as the years go on. Usually, as a teacher, each year you may get a little pay increase, but with a superintendent, that usually takes maybe 5 to 10 years for you to actually see a good pay increase.
Okay. All right. Could you tell our audience a little bit about this profession's demographic?
Yes. Presently, within superintendents nationally. There are 34% female and 66% male. We're currently seeing a growth, though, within the female population growing within the superintendent market. Also, a lot of the superintendents have a strong education background. 60% of them have PhDs. All of them have master's degrees, and the age is usually between 45 and 50 years old.
Very interesting, thank you. Another question from an audience member is, what are the trends in this profession?
Well, there's been seen a growth within superintendents. From the fiscal year 1992 up until 2009, there was a 46% increase within superintendents, 6% growth seen in this industry. Smaller districts have been closing, while many urban, larger districts have been opening, causing a rise for superintendents and more of a need for them in the larger areas. And as districts and the education system begin to find stability within the curriculum and goals, superintendents are starting to serve longer terms. As Heidi had spoke about, some superintendents serve 5 years, some serve 10. There have even been some that serve up to 15 years. It just depends on the quality of that superintendent.
Okay, thank you. What are the labor and product markets like in this profession?
Well, the labor market, presently, more and more teachers to obtain a degree in education administration. So the job of a superintendent, could be seen as kind of competitive, just because there are a limited amount of school districts, and there are so many teachers these days trying to get to that higher level of education administration. The product market in education, well, as a superintendent, we sell education. So our job is to make sure that we employ quality educators and staff members to successfully enrich the learning process in which students are involved in.
All right, thank you. And that concludes this episode of Economics Anonymous. Thank you for joining us today.